I still remember the exact night Ryan spread a map across our kitchen table and started circling neighborhoods. He had a highlighter in one hand and his phone in the other, pulling up apartment listings, zooming in on school districts, talking about which areas had the best coffee shops and the shortest commute. He was 27 years old, and he was planning our entire future with the same focused energy he brought to everything he loved. And I was sitting across from him, watching his face light up, nodding at the right moments, asking the right questions. And I was already 3 weeks into sleeping with someone else. What would you have done if you were in my place? Before you decide how you feel about me, I want you to stay here for a few minutes. Because I've spent a long time being the villain in this story, and I'm not asking you to change that. I'm just asking you to understand how someone ordinary, someone like me, ends up somewhere like this. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And ask yourself honestly, as I talk, whether you've ever stood at the edge of something you knew was wrong and felt the pull anyway. His name was Ryan. We had been together for almost 4 years. We met at a mutual friend's going-away party when I was 22 and he was 23, and it was the kind of meeting that feels inevitable in retrospect, easy conversation that stretched into 3 hours, then a walk around the block that turned into 2, then a first date the following Thursday that neither of us wanted to end. Ryan was everything I thought I had always wanted. Thoughtful, patient, deeply, almost stubbornly optimistic about the future and about us. For the first 2 years, I loved him in that full, uncomplicated way that you can only really love someone before life gets too loud. We spent weekends exploring the city, cooking elaborate meals that never quite turned out right, staying up too late talking about things that mattered and things that didn't. It was good. Genuinely, honestly good. But somewhere in year 3, something changed. And I want to be careful here because I've spent a long time trying to locate the exact source of what went wrong, and I've had to accept that it wasn't one clean thing. It was a slow accumulation, a gradual drift that neither of us was fully paying attention to. Ryan had gotten a promotion at work around that time, and with it came a level of ambition and focus that left very little space for anything else. He wasn't neglectful in the obvious ways. He still said "I love you" every morning, still showed up to things that mattered. But emotionally, he had become harder to reach. Like he was always slightly behind a glass wall, present but not quite available. And I had my own things going on, a job I was increasingly unhappy in, friendships that were quietly fracturing as everyone moved into different life stages, a low-level anxiety that had started following me around like a shadow. I was restless in a way I couldn't articulate, like I was waiting for my real life to start, even though by every measurable standard, it already had. I tried, for a while, to bring it up with Ryan. "I feel like we've stopped actually talking," I said one evening, "like we're just coexisting." He looked up from his laptop, and I could see him trying to shift gears, trying to be present. "What do you mean? We talked at dinner. We talked about your project timeline and whether we needed more dish soap. That's not talking, Ryan." He closed the laptop. "Okay, I'm listening. What do you want to talk about?" And I sat there and I realized I didn't know how to answer that, because what I wanted wasn't a conversation. What I wanted was to feel like he wanted to have one, spontaneously, without me asking, and I didn't know how to explain that distinction without sounding irrational. "Forget it," I said. "It's fine." That word "fine," I used it like armor for months. Everything was fine. We were fine. I was fine. I wasn't fine. His name was Joel. I want to say that clearly and not dress it up, because one of the ways we protect ourselves from our own choices is by keeping them abstract. He wasn't a concept or a mistake. He was a specific person with a name. I met him through work. He was a contractor brought in on a project our company was running, and we spent 3 weeks in close proximity, collaborating, problem-solving, spending long afternoons in the same conference room running on bad coffee and shared frustration. Joel was not a better man than Ryan. I want to say that too, clearly, because I think part of what makes these stories dangerous is when we romanticize the person we chose wrong with. Joel was charming and perceptive, and he paid attention to me in a way that felt like sunlight on skin after a long winter. But he was also careless with people. I knew that about him even then, on some level. I just didn't let myself hold it very long. It started with conversat. Ian, isn't that always how it starts? He asked me questions that Ryan hadn't been asking, not because Ryan didn't care, but because Ryan had stopped being curious in the way that early love makes you curious. Joel asked me what I actually wanted from my career. He asked me what I was afraid of. He asked me what made me feel most like myself. And I answered every time with more honesty than I'd shown anyone in months, including myself. There was a Friday afternoon in late October where the rest of the team had left early and Joel and I were the only ones still in the office. We were at the printer waiting for something to spit out, standing too close the way you do in small spaces, and he turned to look at me and said, "You're not happy. I don't mean right now. I mean in general. You have this look sometimes, like you're somewhere far away." I should have deflected. I should have laughed it off or changed the subject. Instead, I said, "Is it that obvious?" And he said, "Only to someone who's been paying attention." That sentence, those 10 words, that was the door opening, and I walked through it fully aware that it was a door. We started texting that evening. Nothing explicitly inappropriate at first, just a continuation of the conversation, a thread we were both reluctant to drop. But the texts had a warmth to them, a particular aliveness, that I had stopped feeling in my conversations with Ryan. And I knew what that meant. I knew exactly what that meant, and I kept going anyway. Ryan called me that same night, late, to tell me he'd been looking at engagement rings. "I'm not proposing yet," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know where my head is. I want a future with you, and I want you to know that's real." I was sitting on the edge of our bed holding my phone, Joel's last text still glowing on the screen, and I said, "That means a lot to me, Ryan." And I meant it. That's the part that's hardest to explain. I meant it completely, and simultaneously I was continuing to do the thing I was doing. Both things were true at once. I have turned that over in my mind more times than I can count, trying to understand how that's even possible. How you can love someone sincerely and still do what I did. I don't have a clean answer. I think the human capacity for compartmentalization is darker and more impressive than most of us want to admit. 2 weeks after that phone call, I slept with Joel. I'm not going to tell you it happened by accident, or that I was swept away and didn't know what I was doing. I knew. I had been watching it approach for days, and I made a choice not to stop it. We were at a bar with a couple of colleagues. The night wound down. The others went home, and we didn't. And then one decision followed another, and by midnight I was standing in a hotel corridor knowing with absolute certainty that what I was about to do was going to change everything, and I did it anyway. The drive home afterward was the longest of my life, not because I felt relief or regret or love or anything cinematic. I felt hollowed out, like I had made a withdrawal from an account I hadn't known was finite until it was empty. Ryan was asleep when I got home. He had left the hallway light on for me, the way he always did. I stood in the hallway looking at that light for a long time. What followed was 3 weeks of the most exhausting performance of my life. I was attentive, helpful, present, overcorrecting in ways I hoped read as affection rather than guilt. I laughed louder at Ryan's jokes. I suggested date nights. I texted him during the day for no reason, just little things, just to maintain the illusion of normalcy. And meanwhile, I was still seeing Joel. Not every day, not even every week, but enough. Enough that it was no longer a mistake. It was a decision I was remaking, repeatedly, with full awareness. Joel never pushed for more than I was offering. He was clear-eyed about what we were, which is either a credit to his honesty or an indictment of his character, depending on how you look at it. He knew I had a boyfriend. He never asked me to leave Ryan. He never gave me an ultimatum or a speech about what he deserved. He just existed in that parallel space I had created and let me come and go, and that absence of pressure somehow made it easier to keep going. If he had pushed, I might have stopped. The ease was almost its own kind of trap. Ryan, to his credit, sensed something. He couldn't name it, but he sensed it. "You seem far away lately," he said one morning over breakfast. Quiet, not accusatory, just honest. "I've had a lot on my mind," I said. "Work stuff." "Is it just work?" I looked at him across the table. My Ryan, with his highlighter maps and his engagement ring research and his unshakable faith that we were building something real. And I said, "Yes, just work." He nodded slowly. Okay, if it ever becomes something else, you can tell me. You know that, right? I know, I said. I think about that meant more than almost any other, because he was giving me an exit. He was leaving the door open, clearly and without pressure, and I didn't walk through it. The discovery happened in the most ordinary way imaginable. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a found phone. Ryan ran into Joel at a sports bar, completely by chance, 3 weeks later. They ended up talking for 20 minutes, two men who had no idea they were connected, making polite conversation. Ryan mentioned my name at some point, the way you do when you're telling someone something about your day. Joel went quiet, and something in that quiet must have been strange enough that Ryan noticed. He came home and asked me one question. How do you know Joel? The way he said it, precise, controlled, watching my face, told me he already suspected something. Not the full truth, but enough. I could have lied. I had become good at it, efficiently and quickly, in the previous weeks. But something about the look on his face made lying feel like a cruelty I was no longer capable of adding to the list of cruelties I had already committed. So I told him. Not standing up, not with some prepared speech. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where he had spread the map, where he had circled our future in yellow highlighter, and I told him. His face didn't collapse the way I had imagined in all the times I had dreaded this moment. He went very still, the stillness of someone absorbing something that is rearranging every assumption they have held. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I was looking at rings. I showed you a photo of one last week and you said you loved it. I know, I said. Was anything real? Everything was real, I said. That's not an excuse, but it's true. He stood up, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. Not slamming it, just closing it. That soft click was one of the worst sounds I have ever heard. Here is the secondary twist, the part I didn't see coming. 2 days later, I found out from a mutual colleague that Joel had been seeing someone else the entire time. Not casually. A serious relationship. A girlfriend of 2 years who had no idea, just like Ryan had no idea, just like I had told myself I was the only one navigating this secret. I had been one of multiple simultaneous deceptions, which is a thing I had not allowed myself to consider, because considering it would have required me to look directly at what kind of situation I was actually in. I felt something strange when I found that out. Not betrayal, exactly. I had no right to feel betrayed. More like a mirror being held up very suddenly and very close. I had been so convinced that my situation was unique, emotionally complex, nuanced. And the truth was that from a distance, it looked exactly like what it was. Ryan and I didn't recover. We tried, briefly, one painful conversation where he asked questions I answered honestly, because I owed him that much, and where I watched him struggle between the love he had for me and the knowledge of what I had done with it. But 4 years of trust cannot be rebuilt in a conversation, or in a month, or maybe ever. We broke up 6 weeks after he found out. The social fallout was quieter than I expected, but more persistent. Mutual friends chose sides, mostly his, which was fair. Some people I had considered close simply went silent, no dramatic confrontation, just a gradual withdrawal, which in some ways was harder than anger would have been. My mother, when I told her what had happened and why Ryan and I had ended, was quiet for a long time and then said, I thought I raised you to handle hard things directly. That sentence has never fully left me. I didn't see Joel again after that. There was nothing to see. What I had mistaken for connection had been, on his side, something considerably less than that. Whatever I thought I had found in those conversations, in that attention, that feeling of being seen, it wasn't what I thought it was. Which doesn't mean the loneliness that drove me there wasn't real. It was. But I had tried to solve a real problem with a false solution, and real problems don't respond to that. It has been 3 years. I am 29 now. I am not with Ryan, and I am not with Joel, and I am not in a relationship at all by choice, because I have spent these years trying to do the work that I should have done instead of what I did. Therapy. Honest conversations with myself about what I actually need, and why I find it so difficult to ask for it directly. An examination of the specific cowardice that makes it easier to seek escape than to speak truth. I think about Ryan sometimes. I hope he found someone who was brave enough to be honest with him. He deserved that. He deserved someone who, when they felt the drift beginning, reached for him instead of for the door. The thing I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is not that I am a terrible person, though I did a terrible thing. It is this. The moment I should have acted was not when I met Joel. It was months before that, at the kitchen table, when Ryan asked me what was wrong and I said fine, and meant I'm drowning and I don't know how to tell you. That was the moment. That was the door I should have walked through. Everything that came after was the cost of walking past it. If you are in a relationship right now where something feels quietly wrong, where you are lonely in a way you haven't named out loud, where someone else is starting to feel like a light in a room that's gotten too dark, I am asking you, from the far side of this, to have the honest conversation before you make the choice I made. Not because it's easy, because it's the only option that doesn't cost everyone around you something they can never fully get back. I know that now. I just learned it in the worst possible way. If this story made you feel something or think about something, leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And share this with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you in the next one.